are in Maseches Shekalim, Perek Vav, Mishnah Aleph. We're going to learn later in the Perek, we've already become familiar with the word shofar, but not the shofar of Rosh Hashanah. The shofar of the collection boxes where you put money in the Beis HaMikdash. We've seen them before. You have another picture on page 41 of the Mishnah Behira. At the bottom, picture 47, that's what a shofar looked like, a collection box. It can hold a lot of money, but you can only put in basically one coin at a time, so that no one can put their hand in there. You can put money in, but you can't take money out unless you're a gizbar and knows how to open the box. So, because we're going to learn about the two shofaros, there were two shofaros, two boxes that had issues, not issues, but they dealt with Machzis HaShekel. There were two shofaros that were Machzis HaShekel shofaros. Therefore, the Mishnah is now going to discuss the fact that not only were there two shofaros, there were 13 boxes in the Beis HaMikdash, and we're going to learn about, not today, but we'll learn about what these 13 boxes were there for, different collections. Once the Mishnah starts talking about 13 boxes, the Mishnah talks about other things that had 13 items in the Beis HaMikdash. So the Mishnah says, Shlosha Asa Shofaros. There were 13 shofaros, these collection boxes. Shlosha Asa Shulchanos. There were 13 different types of tables. We're always familiar with the shulchan that's in the Heichal. Remember how we enter the Heichal. On the south side of the Heichal is the menorah. On the northern side of the Heichal is the shulchan. And then there's the Mizbeach HaKtoris in the middle. And then there's the partition. And behind the partition is the Kodesh HaKadoshim. You can see that if you want to, page 42. We again have a replica of our Midos diagram number 3. So there were 13 shofaros, 13 shulchanos, 13 different tables. The lechem, the table in the Heichal, which had the lechem aponim on it, was just one of those 13. Shlosh esrei hishtacha vayod. There are 13 places in the, when you enter the Har HaBayis, there were 13 places where you would bow down. We learned about this in Masechta Midos, and there are two different reasons why there were 13 places to bow in the Beis HaMikdash. Today we're going to learn about one of them, which we learned about already in Masechta Midos. Remember, we're going to get to it. Masechta Midos, there was a machlokes, why there are 13 places to bow. We're going to only have in today's Mishnah one of the two opinions that we saw in Midos. Shel Beis Rabbi Gamliel Shel Beis Rabbi Hananya Segan HaKohanim Hayu Mishtachim Arba Esrei. The family of Rabbi Gamliel, the house of the Nasi, and the family of Rabbi Hananya Segan HaKohanim, when they went into the Har HaBayis, they bowed 14 times. So it's the 13 times that everyone else would bow. We'll learn about the 13 places in a moment. But Rabbi Gamliel's family and the family of Rabbi Hananya Segan HaKohanim, they bowed down 14 times. Where was this 14th time? And everybody is always interested in knowing what happened to the Aron, the Ark. What happened during the destruction of the first Beis HaMikdash? Did the Babylonians take it? What we do know is, in the second Beis HaMikdash, there was no Aron. There were 5 major things that were not present in the second Beis HaMikdash, that were not returned. They didn't come back. One of them was the Aron. What happened to this Aron? In the second Beis HaMikdash, when the Kohen Gadol went into the Kodesh Kadoshim, to offer the Ketoras of Yom Kippur, he would, in the first Beis HaMikdash, he would bring the Ketoras in front of the Aron. The second Beis HaMikdash, there was no Aron. He would bring the Ketoras at the Eben Shesiyah, at that rock that's on the Har HaBayis. Where was this 14th place? Heichan Haisa Yisera, where's the extra place that Rabbi Gamliel's family, Rabbi Hanania, and some people call Rabbi Hanania, some people call Rabbi Hanina. Rabbi Hanania Sagana Kohanim, where was the 14th place? Kinegadir Ha'etzim. If you remember, in the Ezra's Noshim, in each corner, there was a chamber. In the northeast chamber was a place called the Dir Ha'etzim, the room of the wood. You go to page 42 of your Mishnah Behira, it's the replica of our Midos number 3. You see the Ezra's Noshim, you see in the northeast corner written in there, Dir Ha'etzim. And we learned about this room of the Eitzim in Masechta Midos. This is the place where wood was brought, and in order to make logs for the Maracha, we learned about the 3 Marachas, the Maracha Gedola, for consuming animal karbanis, the Maracha Shel Ketores to create coals on the outer Mizbeach to bring into the inner Mizbeach to bring the Ketores on, and the Maracha of Eish Tamid, the Maracha to make sure that there was always a fire on the Mizbeach. These logs had to be cut into logs, and then they also had to be checked to make sure there were no worms inside the wood. Where was this cutting up and this checking of the wood done? In the northeast chamber of the Ezra's Noshim, which is called the Dir Ha'etzim. And who did this checking? We learned in Masechta Midas that Balei Mum, Kohanim who had blemishes that prohibited them from doing Avod in the Beis HaMikdash, they were nevertheless given the privilege of checking the wood that would go on the Maracha. So Balei Mum would be in the Dir Ha'etzim, cutting the wood into logs and checking for worms. Why is this Dir Ha'etzim now coming up? So the Mishnah says that Ram Gamliel's family, Rabbi Chanina Skana Kohanim's family, they, like everyone else, would bow at 13 places on the Har HaBayis, but then they would bow in the 14th place. And that 14th place was when they came close to the Dir Ha'etzim, that northeast corner of the Ezra's Noshim, they would bow there. Why? Shekei Maseches b'yodam Avosayim shesham ha'orei nignaz. The family of Rabbi Gamliel and the family of Rabbi Hanina Skana Kohanim had a Kabbalah in their family that the Aron was not taken to Bavel by the Babylonians when they destroyed the Beis HaMikdash. In fact, the Aron was hidden under this Dir Ha'etzim room. In fact, the Aron was taken out of the Beis HaMikdash at the end of the first Beis HaMikdash. Yoshio HaMelech, the great tzaddik Yoshio, who we read about in Kinnis in Tisha B'Av, he was killed by the Egyptian king, and there's the story in the Gemara in Tainus about him. We talked about him a bit on Tisha B'Av. And there's a Kina family who was a great tzaddik Yoshio, and he foresaw the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, and he removed the Aron so that the enemies would not be able to capture the Aron, and he put it into a secret tunnel under the Dir Ha'etzim. The Rav on page Rabbeinu Avadmi Bar Tanura on page 41 of the Mishnah Behira explains the history, and he says that Shlomo HaMelech himself, when Shlomo built the Beis HaMikdash 410 years before it was destroyed, Shlomo HaMelech built secret tunnels under this area so that when the Beis HaMikdash Chas v'Sholom is destroyed, Shlomo HaMelech foresaw this, that if you take a look in the Rav says on page 41, Shesham ha'oren nignaz, Sheoshio HaMelech tziva v'ganzu lamata v'matmonius ha'koimas v'akalkaloi shabona shloima b'zman she'bonas habayis v'yoda she'sefer lechorev. Shlomo HaMelech knew when he built the Beis HaMikdash that it would end in destruction, and therefore he built secret tunnelways in this area under the wood chamber, and that's where Yoshio, at the end of the first Beis HaMikdash, took the Aron and hid it. Therefore, because of that Kabbalah that the family of Rabbi Gamliel had, and the family of Rabbi Chanina Skana Kohanim had, when they entered the Harabayas and went near the Lishkas Dir Ha'etzim, that northeast corner of the Ezras Noshim, they bowed there, and therefore, besides the 13 bowings everywhere else that everyone else did, they bowed because they had a Kabbalah that the Aron was Nignaz under this room. To further their Kabbalah, the Mishnah in Mishnah Beis says, Maisa b'koyin echad shehoyim misasek. We have a recorded incident of Kohen. Obviously, he was a Baal Mum. And this Kohen Baal Mum is working in the Dir Ha'etzim. And what's he doing in the Dir Ha'etzim? He's cutting wood into logs, or he's removing from the logs worms. And he's doing his work. He's doing his work in the Dir Ha'etzim. And he took a very close look at the tiles, I guess marble tiles, on the floor of the Dir Ha'etzim, and he noticed one tile was different than all the other tiles. Now, he's not the first Kohen to be in the Dir Ha'etzim. There were a lot of Kohanim that came in and came out to cut the wood and check for worms. People came in and out of the Dir Ha'etzim. It's the northeast chamber of the Ezras Noshim. You're allowed to go in there. But he took a very close look at the floor, and on that given day, he noticed that one tile was not exactly level with all the other tiles. Turning now to page 45. And he went over to a friend of his, another Kohen, and he was about to tell him, you know what? I think something's going on. There's a tile that's not exactly the same level of the other tile. And he wanted to talk to him about the tiles. Well, hispik ligmar sadava, he couldn't even finish telling his friend that the tile was not level. He started, but he couldn't even finish the story, and he died. And from here, Chachamim concluded that in fact the Aron is Nignaz under the Dir Ha'etzim, and that's why he was unable to talk about it, and he died before he was able to sort of pass on the secret. And therefore, that's what we have, that the Aron is Nignaz in what would have been, what was the northeast corner of the Ezras Noshim, the Dir Ha'etzim. And of course, if you go back to our Masechta Midos pictures, we have a picture of the Beis HaMikdash. If you remember, we have a picture of the Beis HaMikdash superimposed on today's Har Habayis. And you can then measure off where approximately the Ezras Noshim is, from which you can approximately measure off where the Dir Ha'etzim is. And that area, according to what we have the Kabbalah now, is that under that area is the Aron Kodesh, is Nignaz, with the Luchas of Moshe, etc. So if you go back to page 41, the Iketos V'Syantif on the left side of the page says, Ha'aron Nignaz. Venirali the incha shelo hishtachavu hayeseira svira lahu the Aron Gol lebavel uchadakina b'gemara. Now we said that Reb Chanina Skana Kohanim and Reb Gamliel's families, they bowed this 14th bowing at the Dir Ha'etzim because they had this Kabbalah, and they also had this story to support their Kabbalah, and therefore they bowed a 14th time at the Dir Ha'etzim. And what about everybody else who didn't bow at the Dir Ha'etzim and only bowed 13 times in the Beis HaMikdash? So the Iketos V'Syantif tells us that the Gemara talks about this in Yuma, talks about in Yerushalmi here in Shekalim, that those people held that in fact the Aron went to Bavel and was Nigla Bavel, and from Bavel it went, etc. The Greeks conquered Bavel, and then the Persians conquered Bavel, and then the Greeks conquered Bavel, etc. Where the Aron is, according to them, we don't know. But and therefore they only bowed 13 times, because their Kabbalah doesn't say that the Aron is under the Dir Ha'etzim, so they only bowed 13 times. Reb Gamliel and Reb Chanina Skana Kohanim's families bowed the 14th time because of the Kabbalah and the story which they concluded supports there the version of the Oren under the deer Ha'etzim. Okay, now we're going to go to Shekalim. We're on page 45, Perek Vav Mishnah Gimel. Perek Vav Mishnah Gimel is going to, in order to understand the Mishnah, which we already do from learning Maseches Midos, Mishnah Gimel, you have to look at page 44, the diagram of the Har HaBayis. This is a diagram that we're very, very familiar with. The eastern gate is Shar Shushan. The northern gate is Shar Tedi. The western gate is Shar Kipunus. And the two gates you enter the Beis HaMikdash from, our rule is you always make a right turn. You enter a gate and you turn right. It doesn't make a difference what your destination is on the Har HaBayis. It doesn't make a difference where you want to get to in the Beis HaMikdash. Even if it's shorter for you, excuse me, to go through a gate, make a left turn, you're not allowed to make a left turn. You walk in and make a right turn and continue moving. Remember, we learned there are some exceptions, Lo Aleinu and Ovel. If he had to come to the Beis HaMikdash, when he was permitted to come to the Beis HaMikdash, he walked into the Beis HaMikdash and made a left turn. Someone that was in Chayrim walked into the Beis HaMikdash and made a left turn. Someone who had a sick person in his house and needed tefillah for him walked in and made a left turn. And why did they make a left turn? Because they were going opposite traffic. Everybody walked in and made a right, and they're continuing going in this direction. The Beis HaMikdash, the Har HaBayis, is a one-way traffic. It's going like this, like this, like this, like this. If someone is going this way, this way, this way, so the Mishnah told us in Midas that people stop him and say, what are you doing? You're supposed to be walking the opposite way. And then he would say, Lo Aleinu, I'm in Ovel. And then they would say, Hamokim Menachem Eschem. So this gave everyone a way to be Menachem Ovel because they noticed the guy's walking the wrong way. If somebody was walking the wrong way, they say, what are you doing? You're supposed to be walking to the right, not to the left. He would say, Lo Aleinu, I'm in Chayrim. And they would give him a bracha. Machlokas, if you remember, Reb Meir and the Tanakh, what bracha they gave him. Somebody, Lo Aleinu, has a very sick person in his house. He goes into the Har HaBayis, makes a left turn. People start saying to him, what are you doing? You need to walk the opposite way. He says, I never have a very sick person in my house. And they say, what's the name? We're going to say Tehillim. So the traffic was one way to the right. If someone went into the left, people would ask him, well, what are you doing? And this would be a way for people to know what's going on with another person. If he needs some kind of assistance, he needs Tehillim, he needs a bracha, he needs a nechama. This is the way it was done. So we have to remember the general rule is you walk in and you walk to the right. When we learn Masechta Midas, we always assume the simple case. And the simple case is a person walked into the base through Shushan Habira. And that's the case of the picture on page 44. So we're going to take a look at the picture first, and then we're going to read the Mishnah. You have a person walking in through Shar Shushan. He is on the Har HaBayis. Then you call the Soreg. The Soreg is a little wall. It's about 10 tefachim high, and it was the line markation. Someone who's been in contact with a dead body cannot go beyond that. A guy cannot go beyond that. That's the Soreg. We mentioned, that's the halacha. There's no dispute about it. There's no rubber fingers about it. Someone that's come into contact with a dead body is allowed to be on the Har HaBayis. There's no dispute about that. It's not a rubber finger issue. That's a clear halacha, and we know it's a clear halacha because the Har HaBayis is Machna Leviyah, and Moshe Rabbeinu lived in Machna Leviyah, and Moshe Rabbeinu kept Yosef's bones with him throughout the Midbar. So Moshe lived in Machna Leviyah with the bones of a dead person. Not just Moshe Rabbeinu came in contact with the bones, he actually kept the bones with him. So you see, a dead person can be in Machna Leviyah, and when we transfer the rules, as we learned in Masechta Midas, we transfer the rules of the Midbar to Yerushalayim Yer HaKodesh. The Har HaBayis is Machna Leviyah, therefore a dead body, and certainly a person who came into contact with a dead body is allowed to go on the Har HaBayis without any problem whatsoever. However, Midrabanan, as a rabbinic rule, they said that a Tomei mace should not go past the area where that soreg was. The wall that's 10 tefachim high. You see the soreg there. Inside the soreg, there was an area called the chel. The chel was 10 amos wide. The soreg was a wall 10 tefachim high, and the chel is an area 10 amos wide. So you see, they're showing you a person. He entered Shar Shushan on the eastern side, and at Shar, when he walks in, he gets to the soreg. At that point, he's going to bow 3 times. Why is he going to bow 3 times? Because as he walks into the Har HaBayis, he is now facing Shar Nicanor, the great big Shar that had 15 steps in front of it, upon which the Levium sang Shira on Sukkot. That's not where the Levium sang their Shira during a korban. When a korban was brought, we learned about that in Masechet Tamid. The Levium said Shira on the Duchan, which is inside the actual Azorah. The Shar Nicanor, if you go to page 46, there's a picture of Shar Nicanor, which we learned about Masechet Tamid. Shar Nicanor, 15 steps in front of it. Those 15 steps are in the Ezras Noshim, and those are the 15 steps that take you from the Ezras Noshim into the Azorah. The Shar Nicanor are the 2 large doors. Inside each of the 2 doors, there was a small door in each of the big doors, and that was called a pishpash. And we learned in Masechet Midas what the purpose of these little 2 doors was. At any rate, how many doors are there to go from the Ezras Noshim into the Azorah? There are 3 doors. The 2 big ones are what we consider the pishpash, the small door. It's considered 1 door. So therefore, when a person enters at Shushan Habira, and he's now facing Shar Nicanor, he's going to bow down 3 times. So those are 3 bows. He's now going to make a right turn. He keeps on walking through the Har HaBayis, and he's going to bow now a 5th time when he gets to the next Shar. And that's Shar Beis Hamoket, or what's called in the Mishnah now Shar Hashir. He continues walking, and he gets to the Shar Noshim. He bows again at that Shar. He gets to Shar Yechonia, he bows again. So he's bowed 3 times in the east, 4 times in the north. He continues now on the west, and there are 2 openings on the west to the Azorah. There are no names to them. It's called the Shar Ma'ariv. So he bows down again. Each time you pass an entry into the Azorah, you bow. 3 in the east, 4 in the north, 2 in the west. He now continues, and he's going to pass the Shar HaElyon, Shar HaDelek, Shar B'chores, Shar Mayim. 4 more times he's going to bow, and then you can see he's going to go out through Sharei Chulda. So 3 in the east, 4 in the north, 2 in the west, and 4 in the south. If you walk around the whole Har HaBayis, you will bow 13 times. If you're from the family of Gamliel Rabbi Chanina Skana Kohanim, you will have bowed a 14th time in the picture on page 42 when you got near the northeast. Read the Mishnah. Vastana, why do you bow 13 times? You bow 13 times because that's how many openings there were into the Azorah, and every time you pass an opening, you bow down, and the bowing down is a thank you to Hashem for giving us such a beautiful Beis HaMikdash, and every place where there's an opening to enter the Beis HaMikdash, there's Eliezer? Eliezer?
Now we're good. We're okay now.
Okay, thank you.
Good. Okay.
And every time a person passed an opening to the Azora, which is an opening into the Beis Hamikdash, he bowed down in thanks to HaKadosh Baruch Hu for giving us such a beautiful Beis Hamikdash. This is the Shita of this Tana. In a moment, we'll remind everybody about what the second Shita is that we learned about Masechet Midas. So the Mishnah says, Perek Vav Mishnah Gimel, Ve'hechen hoyu mishtachim, where did they bow down? Arba Batzafoin, 4 in the north. We just did that on page 44 of the diagram. Arba Badoroin, 4 on the south. Again, the diagram, page 44. Sholosh Bamizrach, 3 in the east for Shar Nicanor, which we just looked at. Ushtayim B'mayrav, and 2 in the west. Keneged Shlosha Osa Sha'orim, you bow 13 times because there are 13 openings into the Azora. Shorim Dromium Smuchim Lamayrav, the southern gates are closer to the western side of the Beis HaMikdash. And again, if you look at the picture, the Mishnah is now just going to give you the names. Shar HaElyon, Shar HaDelek, Shar HaBechora, Shar HaMayim. We learned about these in Maseches Midas, and now we literally have a copy of part of the Mishnah Maseches Midas. Lama Nikra Shmoi Shar HaMayim. Why is that opening to the Azora called Shar HaMayim? If you look at the picture on page 44, you see on the southern side, there's a Shar HaMayim, right opposite the Mizbeach. Shabo Machnisim Sloka Shamayim Shal Nisa B'chag. That's where they brought in the water that they took from the Gihon for the Nisa Hamayim on Sukkot. And they brought it into the Beis HaMikdash through that gate, the gate of water. And you see the gate of water is right next to the Mizbeach. And so conveniently they brought it into there. Thank you. Conveniently they brought it into there and they poured the water on the Mizbeach at the appropriate time. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says there's another reason why this is called Shar HaMayim. Boy HaMayim Mefakim. Mefakim here comes from the word Pach. The famous word by Hanukkah, the Pach Hashemen, the losing my English, the Pach Hashemen, the anybody have a word for the Pach? Pach Hashemen, the bottle of oil, the flask of oil. Mafakim means water turned into a flask. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer boy hamayim mefakim va'asidem liyos yotzim mitachas mifnan habayis. If you take a look in Rabbeinu Avadim Mibar Tanura in Hamayim Mefakim, he quotes a pasuk in Yecheskel where Yecheskel prophesizes. We learned about this. Yecheskel had a prophecy about what the third Beis Hamikdash would look like, even before the second one was built. We've spoken about that. So there's a pasuk in Yecheskel in chapter 47 where Yecheskel talks about a tiny waterway coming out of the area of the Beis HaMikdash. It'll be very, very thin. It'll be thin like the horns of a grasshopper, very thin. And gradually, as it leaves the Kodesh Kodashim and gets close to the Shar HaMayim, it will get wider and wider until at the Shar HaMayim, it will be mefakim. It will be the size of a flask. So Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says that's why this is called the Shar HaMayim, because in the future, when the third Beis HaMikdash is built, b'meher v'yameinu mamish today, there's going to be water that's going to flow right out of that Shar, right out of that gate. L'umasam, the Mishnah says, Batzaf and Smuch and L'mayrav. Opposite these 3 southern gates to the Azora, there are 4 other northern gates, and they're also towards the west. And if you take a look at the picture on page 44, you'll see them. They're named there. Shar Yechonya, Shar Korban, Shar Noshim, Shar Hashir. The Lama Nikra Shmo Yechonya. Why is the gate on the west? If you look on page 44, you see that the gate on the northern side that's closest to the west, northwest, is called Shar Yechonya. Yechoniah was one of the last Jewish kings. He was exiled to Bavel, and he remained in prison there for many years. Nebuchadnezzar imprisoned him until he was released by Nebuchadnezzar's son Evil-Merodach. But he was in prison, and a gate to the Beis Hamikdash is named after him. Why? Shebo Yatza Yechoniah Begaluso. That is the place that Yechoniah left when Yechoniah knew that he was going into exile through the Babylonians. If you take a look at the Rav on the left side of your page on page 46, Shebo Yatza Yechoniah Begaluso, Sheniknas LeBeis Hamikdash L'Shtachavos. Before he went into exile, he went into the Beis Hamikdash to bow. Velito Rishush Sheholach LeGoy LeBavel. And he went into the Beis Hamikdash to ask permission to go into Golus. These are very, very strange words that need a lot of examination. The Babylonians have him basically in chains, and he knows that he's going into exile. But before he goes into exile, he wants to go into the Beis Hamikdash and ask permission from God if it's all right for him to leave Eretz Yisrael and to go into exile. Sheniknas LeBeis Hamikdash L'Shtachavos, Velito Rishus, he wanted to ask permission, Sheholach LeGoy LeBavel, when he was going into the Babylonian exile, V'yotza derech Osashar, and that's the exit he went through on the way out of Yerushalayim and towards Bavel. So we call that gate in his honor Shar Yechoniah. That's the gate where Yechoniah went into Golus. Bamizrach, on the eastern side, again, if you look at page 44, we show that a person bowed 3 times on the eastern side. Shar Nicanor, Ushnei Pishpishin Hoyloi, it had 2 little doors in the big doors, Echad B'Minoi ve'Echad B'Smoiloi, Ushnayim B'Marbav, and then there are 2 gates, there are 2 entrances into the Azorah in the west, which again you can see on page 44. Shlohoi Lahem Shein, they did not have a name. So when you went into the Harabayas, you would bow 3 times in the east, 4 times the north, twice on the west, 4 times on the south, and then leave Harabayas, assuming you went around the whole Harabayas. If you went into the Harabayas, for example, if you go to page 44, if you went into the Harabayas to Shar Shushan Habira in the east, you bow 3 times. You go towards the north, you bow 4 times, that's 7. You go to the west, you bow 2 times, that's 9. And then the person is ready to leave the Harabayas. He walks out, and there was a gate there, Shar Kipunus. He walked out of the Shar Kipunus. You can see it on page 44, Shar Kipunus, the northern gate from the Harabayas back into the city. A person may have bowed only 8 times or 9 times. Depends how far you walked around the Harabayas. You don't have to go around the whole Harabayas and have to bow 13 times. It's just every time you pass a gate, you bow at the Harabayas. This is the Shita of this Tana. If you take a look at the Rav on the left side of your page on page 46, 5 lines on the bottom right here, Avul Chachamim, okay, we're on page 46 in the Rav, Avul Chachamim. According to this sheet in the Mishnah, this is Abba Yossi ben Chanan, who holds that there are actually 13 entryways into the Azorah, and you bowed at each one as you passed it, as a thank you to Hashem for such a beautiful Beis Hamikdash. Avul Chachamim Oimim, the Chacham disagree with Abba Yossi, and they say Shiva Sha'orim Hoyu Lazorah. There are only 7 entryways into the Azorah, not 13. As Machlekes Rishonim, whether they actually argue that the Chacham say there are only 13, or is it that everybody agrees that there are 13, and the Chacham say there are only 7 major entryways, and Abba Yossi says that the minor entryways are also counted. As an example, Page 46, you have those pishpashim, those little doors in the big doors. Rabbi Yossi says that each of those doors is counted as a door, and the Chacham hold that they're little doors. We don't count them as entryways into the Azorah. The entryway in the Azorah is the big door, Shar Nikanor. So there are two ways to learn what's happening here. The Chacham say there are only 7, and Rabbi Yossi says there are 13. Or everybody agrees there are 13, and Rabbi Yossi is counting the big doors and the small doors, and the Chacham only counting the larger doors. Either way, the Rav now says, Ava Chachamim oimim shiva sh'orim hayu la'azorah. Chacham hold there are only Azorah, so then why do you bow 13 times? We learned about this in Midas. Ve'inu savri dahanach shlosh esrei hishtachavoyes kineged shlosh esrei pirtze sheportzu malcha yovim ba'azorah u'kshegavru malchi chashmanoi v'nitzlum v'goduois and pirtzes tiknu shlosh esrei hishtachavoyes kineged kol pirtze gedura hishtachavoyim. The Greeks, when they dominated the Beis Hamikdash, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shakol niyeh b'dvaroi. The Greeks, when they dominated the Beis Hamikdash, if you go back to picture page 44, there's the soreg. The soreg is a 10 tefah high fence, and that fence was a border, goyim or tamei meis. Right now, for our discussion, goyim can't go past there. And we mentioned in Masechta Midas when we learned it that there were actually signs on the soreg. A goy may not enter past this fence, punishable by death. I believe it said punishable by death. And they have actually found stones that have this engraving on it, warning goyim. And I believe at that time, Mayor Beck posted for us from a picture from a museum where they actually found pieces of one of these stones. So a goy could not go past the soreg. The Greeks were quite upset at that idea, that Jews can enter the Beis Hamikdash and Goyim can't go as far as Jews, which means that the Jewish people consider themselves of there's something special about the Jewish people. They can go into the Beis Hamikdash to places where a Gentile can. And as we know, the Maharal, other Sfarim talk about that the Nes of Hanukkah is the Nes of Havdalas Yisrael min ha'amim. It was the miracle by which the Rebbeinu Shalom said, I want to tell the whole world, I want the Jewish people to know that they are different than the whole world. They conduct their affairs differently than the whole world, and that they set an example for the whole world. So therefore, the whole battle between the Yevonim and the Jewish people was a battle over, yes, you are Jewish, but you're no different than anyone else. And that's why, for example, Rafutna says in the Pachad Yitzchak that the Yevonim are kind of strange birds when it comes to Goyim. When the Babylonians took over Yerushalayim and they took over the Beis Hamikdash, they burnt the place down. When the Romans came into the Beis Hamikdash, they burnt the place down. The Yevonim came into the Beis Hamikdash and they left it standing. The only thing they did is they defiled everything. They left the Beis Hamikdash standing, and they said, everybody do the avo. Do you want to bring karbonis? But first, before you bring karbonis, we're going to bring a chazer on the Mizbeach. You want to light your menorah? You can light the menorah. We have no problem with that. We're just going to contaminate the oil. So the Yevonim were your people who said everybody worships any which way they want, but they can't say they're special and different. Everyone is perfectly equal. So the battle was between the Am Segula status that we have and the Yevonim. The Soreh, which is the marker beyond which a guy can't go, is to them completely objectionable because it says we are Am Segula and you are not. So they punctured 13 holes into the Soreg, and through these 13 holes, they would enter the Beis HaMikdash to show that the Jews are no different than the Goyim. Why did they do 13? We learned about it in Masechta Midos. They did it Keneged 13 Shvatim, even though there were only 12. They count Menashe and Ephraim, they count Levi. Okay, so they made 13 punctures into the Soreg. I'm getting a message from somebody called MB that he doesn't have sound. Does Eliezer, do you have sound? Does everybody have sound?
I have
Does
sound, yes.
anyone have sound?
Yes.
Yes.
What?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
there's sound. Okay, so
Yes, but it's flaky sound.
It's
The sound
Is
is
my-
the sound is deteriorates. Maybe you need your your Wi-Fi is weak.
It's erratic.
We'll manage.
okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
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 Okay, fine.
Yes, you're good.
The Avonim punctured 13 holes into the Soreg, and they would enter the Beis HaMikdash from there. When the Hashmonaim defeated the Avonim, they sealed up those 13 places. And from that time on, according to this man, the Amma, the Chachamim, every time you passed one of these 13 places that got sealed up, you bowed as a thank you to Hashem for giving Klal Yisrael the victory over the Yevonim and separating us from the Yevonim. So according to Abba Yossi ben Chanan, you bow 13 times in the Har HaBayis, because there are 13 entryways in the Azorah, and every time you pass an entryway, you bow, because it's an entryway into the Beis HaMikdash, and you thank Hashem for such a beautiful Beis HaMikdash. According to the Chachamim, there are only 7 entryways into the Azorah, and the reason you bow 13 times is not when you reach entry into the Azorah, it's when you reach a point where the Hashmonaim sealed up a puncture that the Yevonim made, that's where you bow. Again, you don't have to bow 13 times. It depends how many places you pass that was sealed up by the Hashmonaim. Again, Rabbi Chanina Sagana Kohanim's family, Rabbi Gamliel's family, they would bow 14 times. One, when they got to the northeast corner of the Ezra's Nashim, because they had a Kabbalah that under the deer, Lishkas Dir HaEtzim, that's where Yoshio HaMelech hid the Oro.